Introduction. A village is a clustered human settlement or community larger than a hamlet or smaller than a town with a population ranging from a few hundred to a few thousands. Villages are normally prominent with fixed dwellings. However, transient villages can occur. Further to the dwellings of a village are very close to one another. A town is a human settlement larger than a village but smaller than a city. The size definition for what constitutes a town varies considerably in different parts of the world. A city is a relatively large and permanent settlement. Basically, a city has a big number of inhabitants, complex economical, cultural, and social functions. Most of the population should be occupied in the tertiary sector, and the most should not work in agriculture. Populations from the city have a different lifestyle from those living in villages. However, city may also include a special administrative, legal, or historical status. A village is a small group of dwellings in a rural area, usually ranking in size between a hamlet and a town. A town has a population center that is larger than a village and smaller than a city. There are no definitions for the population size which delimits a town or city. All countries in the world are made up of villages, cities, and towns. Villages are said to be rural in nature, where agriculture is the main way of life, and cities and towns are said to be urban in nature, where industry and administration are the major occupations of the people. We will now look at the different ways in which urban and rural areas are linked in India and most of the world. Food. All over the world, it is the villages that are centers of agriculture and food production and which fed the towns and the cities. This is the result of urbanization, increasing popularity of life in the cities, which has led to people from villages and towns migrating to live in big cities. The dependency of towns and cities on the villages as source of food has increased today, and villages are vitally the lifelines of cities today. Many of the big cities of India would face huge food and water crisis if communication and transport to nearby villages are cut off. This is actually quite a recent trend. Earlier, cities took the form of self-sustaining city-states, and they were fed from their immediate surroundings, and the harvest was the most important event of the year. Animals and livestock were walked into the city market, and grain came into the city by river and bullock cart. But with the increasing technological innovation, our urban food supply got reshaped. The railway enabled food to be brought into the city from greater distances beyond the immediate surroundings that had traditionally supplied the city. The food supply chain began to differentiate from its earlier close association with people. In the past, food was always found in the marketplaces in the middle of our towns and cities. People gathered in the city and markets to buy and sell food, to gossip and exchange news. The city market also shop, news bureau, and social exchange, as well as the vital heart of the city. The market was the point of interaction between farmer and consumer. Today, the supermarkets and shopping malls now define how cities interact with food. The stacked shelves of prepared and cooked foods draw thousands of car-bound travelers from far away. The pulling power of the department store suppresses opportunity for smaller traders and contributors to suburban food market, which source of fresh food are non-existent within reasonable travel distance. Department stores are a huge contrast to the traditional town center market. The shopping malls are enclosed spaces. Few offer any view of their surroundings. Few have a clock to tell the time. A department store is the same as midday or midnight. These places with their enclosed worlds are time independent and quite divorced from the reality of life in the old day city markets. Thus, cities have become artificial places totally dependent on villages for their everyday basic needs. This is not a healthy trend and needs to be changed. Many countries of the world have become aware of this problem and are trying to remedy the situation of proper planning for growth food and having natural spaces within cities. In India, villagers who are earlier easygoing and allowed the cities to feed off the villages and dump their waste into the land have become more hostile now. Two major metro cities of India, Bangalore and Chennai, have recently faced problems from nearby villages and have objected to their village way of being totally dominated by the presence of a major city that have made life in the villages more expensive and difficult. The rising real estate prices near cities has also resulted in the phenomena of all farmland close to cities being sold off and replaced with apartments and industrial complexes. It will require a lot of planning by the government to reduce this dependency of towns and cities on villages for food and to make sure that they exist in a manner mutually beneficial for each other. Employment. In today's world, towns and cities have been the main locations where people looking for regular employment in offices and cooperation or wanting to conduct a business that yields quick profit are able to find what they are looking for. One of the major attractions of city and town life is the fact that the jobs here do not call for hard physical labor the way agricultural life or life in the villages closer to nature demands. Although India has traditionally been an agricultural country for the past few decades, the development route followed by the Indian government is to encourage industrialization and urban way of life. It has also become the desire of the majority of the Indian population to aspire for an easy life in the city with more material comforts than to choose to live in the villages where the infrastructure as well as access to education and healthcare is minimal. According to the United Nations, the statistics for migration in India is rural to rural migration still dominated and accounted for 53.3 million. Rural to urban migration 20.5 million. Urban to rural migration 6.2 million. And urban to urban migration 14.3 million. Migration in India is not new, and historical accounts show that people have moved in search of work in response to environmental shocks and stresses, to escape religious precaution and political conflict. However, improved communications, transport networks, conflicts over natural resources, and new economic opportunities have created unprecedented levels of mobility in recent years. Migrant labor makes enormous contribution to the Indian economy through major sectors such as construction, textiles, small industries, brick making, stone quarries, mines, fish and prawn processing, and hospitality services. But migrants remain in the periphery of society with few citizen rights and no political voice in shaping decisions that impact their lives. Unlike countries in Southeast Asia, East Asia, the bulk of the migrant workforce in India has little or no education. In fact, migrants are poorly endowed all round. They come from poor families where access to physical, financial, and human capital is limited, and where prospects for improving living standards are constrained by their inferior social and political status. Historically disadvantaged communities such as scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward castes are heavily represented in migration. Poor migrants are absorbed in informal sector jobs, much criticized for being insecure, poorly paid and unproductive, but offering the only option for laborers to improve their capabilities. Thus, we see that one of the major linkages between urban and rural areas, that of unemployment opportunities, is full of social problems in India. aggravated by the caste system and the inequities that have traditionally existed in Indian society. In response to this growing trend towards urban migration in search of employment, which is putting a huge pressure on the infrastructure of the cities and causing social problems in cities, the Indian government has come up with a rural employment scheme which promises 100 days of work to people in the villages through an act of law called the NREGA, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. The NREGA aims to enhancing the livelihood of security of people in rural areas by guaranteeing 100 days of wage employment in a financial year to a rural household whose adult members volunteer to do unskilled manual work. Administration. Towns and cities have always been the centers of administration of governments. All three arms of the government, the executive, judiciary and the legislative, have offices and headquarters in the cities. The top officials of the legislature, judiciary and the executive are always available only in the cities, and people from villages and towns often to have journey to capital cities to get any work done through the government. Although local offices may exist in smaller towns and villages, there is some sort of local government like the Gram Panchayat and the town council, etc., through which the local work can be carried out. Higher level of work regarding the government is usually carried out only in big cities. The high courts and head offices of all government offices are always located in capital cities. The legislative assemblies and the law-making machinery are also always located in the capital cities. The Chief Minister, Prime Minister, President, as well as MLAs and MPs usually reside in cities to conduct an official business associated with the government. MLAs and MPs may reside in towns and villages of their own constituencies for part of the year, but they are always required to travel to capital cities for conducting any business associated with the government. So one of the most important urban-rural linkages is the existence of the city as the center of government, and therefore cities wield a lot of power even with respect to government dealings that affect villages. People from the villages therefore often travel to cities to conduct any business that has to do with the government offices. In fact, cities usually develop in size and population due to the presence of government offices associated with the functioning of the heads of the legislature, executive and the judiciary. Education. One of the main reasons for migration of younger people and families from rural to urban areas is the access to quality education. Although in recent years the Government of India has come up with many national schemes to bring quality education to the rural areas of India, like the National Literacy Initiative of the 1990s, the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan of the 2010s, etc., India has still not managed to reach the target of having globalization of primary education, where every Indian child is able to go to school. It is not only the case of primary schools, while the condition of education at all levels in India for the poor and the middle class is not very good. In big cities, we find good arrangements for education. Big colleges, universities are found here. Even a person of ordinary means can make his sons and daughters like the highest education according to their financial capacity. There are also a very large number of schools both for boys and girls in every city. They also provide well-equipped libraries and reading rooms for public use. Such arrangements do not exist in small towns and villages. When the government targets for globalization of primary education has not been achieved, the debate regarding quality in education has not even started in India. We find that the government is still struggling to find teachers, build toilets and have basic safety measures and amenities in rural areas. So the question of quality education still has many decades to come into the focus of the nation. Therefore, the rural population has no other choice but to migrate to cities in search of better educational opportunities. Education has become the one most important tool for achieving society equity in today's world. It is the aspiration of every parent to get their child well educated and secure a good life for them. So people move from the villages to the cities to give their children the chance of a better life. We sometimes find children staying in hostels away from their families in order to get a good education. Sometimes the whole family moves to the city to give the children a chance to study in a good school. Education opportunities have therefore become an important area of urban-rural linkage and the reason for a lot of movement between villages and towns and cities in today's world. Art and culture. Art and culture can be said to be the expressions of the soul of the individual as well as a society. Art and culture depend on traditions, way of life, geographical climate, habits of clothing, food and socialization, etc. of a society. Both rural and urban ways of life aspires different kinds of art and culture and also influences each other. The villages are centers of traditional art and culture. Towns and cities depend on the villages to have access to arts and craftsmen of traditional forms of art. Villages often still retain the traditional schools established many decades ago for training young people in the traditional art, craft and martial art methods, and they are often the best places to get trained in tradition. These village schools are often not very expensive and still retain the old world simplicity and connection to nature. Cities therefore access traditional art and culture from villages. Cities are often the places to get exposed to art and culture from all parts of the world. Many Indian cities are very cosmopolitan places where people from all parts of India and all parts of the world live and come together to create modern movements of art and culture. One often hears of artist villages and global villages that exist in metropolitan cities which bring out the best among the talented artists here. Indian cinema has become one of the most popular ambassadors of Indian culture to the world. It is also a very big industry in today's India. Many Indian film stars are known all over the world and recognized by people of all nationalities. The major center of Indian films is in Mumbai, and Bollywood, as it is called, churns out many thousands of films in a year that is watched all over India and the world. Since India is a country with many communities and many regional languages, there are many important regional centers where films in languages other than Hindi are made. Notable among these are Chennai for Tamil films, Bangalore for Kannada films, and Hyderabad for Telugu films. Kolkata is the center of some world-famous making by Bengali filmmakers. A fledgling film industry of every regional language like Oriya, Assamese, Nagaland, Rajasthani and Gujarati exists in each of these states. Films have become an important medium of communication between the urban and the rural population of India. In fact, films have become responsible for communicating the chances in technology and the rest of the world into the remotest corners of India, very quickly and making sure that all parts of India are connected to each other. Urbanization is a worldwide trend that started many centuries ago. While there are many arguments for and against urbanization, the trend itself remains quite strong and has picked up momentum even in an agricultural country like India. However, recent developments in Indian cities, namely the high level of population, the exorbitant cost of renting or buying property, the difficulty in getting access to fresh food, the huge traffic jams, etc., have caused a slight change in the midst of people who have earlier rushing in to adapt a life in the cities. In the last few years, Indians have realized the urbanization is not the answer to every problem. The urban life comes with its own set of problems in terms of increasing stress levels. declining level of health of children as well as adults, increased cost of living, fragmentation of family, exposure of the children to unhealthy habits like drugs and pornography. We can now see a slight shift among the Indian population who are yearning for the peaceful and healthy way of life of their parents and grandparent generation. While this trend has not yet turned into a wave or a boom, only a small minority of people are beginning to think in these lines. The future of the world thinking is also moving towards sustainable living and environment-friendly practices. All over the world, the developed countries have relied their limitations imposed by nature or material development, and then the urban lifestyle is causing us to use up our natural resources in a very unsustainable way. Therefore, we can anticipate a trend towards ruralization or at least sustainable and natural way of life in all parts of the world in the decades to come. In this scenario, we may then see that the urban-rural linkages we have studied above reverse in direction and the villages become the hub of life of all concerned.